In this video, I'm going to tell you a few tips that helped me ace medical school and rank first in my class. So tip number one, go to lecture and pay attention. Throughout the entire course of medical school, I only missed one or two lectures, and that was only because I had to go to a family wedding. Otherwise, I'd show up to every lecture, whether I was sick or just not feeling like going or really tired, I'd go to lecture. And try not to just show up physically, try to be there, awake and alert and paying attention. This is a lot harder than it seems. The way I got around this is I'd have a fast-paced game open on my laptop, ready to go. It would usually be something like Super Smash Bros. 64 or a racing game, and whenever I felt myself kind of dozing off, I would just pop it open and I'd play for about 10 to 15 seconds and I'd be awake again and able to pay attention. Number two, condense your lectures and your notes as much as possible. How it worked at my school is we had exams every 3 weeks, and we'd have 4 two-hour classes a day, and each class or lecture was about 60 to 120 slides. So if you do the math on that, it's about 3,600 to 7,200 slides per exam block. It's a lot of slides to go through, and you have to be efficient in how you study. I'd go through the lectures multiple times. Each time I went through it, I'd understand a little bit more. I'd be able to condense the material a little bit more and get rid of some of the more long-winded explanations and some of the things that just became more obvious to me as I understood the material a little bit more. You know, the first time you go over a lecture, it might take, 2-3 hours. The next time you go over it, it's a little faster and a little faster and a little faster. And after reviewing the lecture 5 to 10 times, you can go through the lecture in 10 to 15 minutes, covering almost everything and understanding almost everything. Number three, study to understand the material, not just to memorize it. Sometimes you can't help but need to memorize it because the stuff just doesn't make sense sometimes, and it's just random facts you need to know. In this case, you should just write these things down on a cue card and tape it to your wall, between your study room and the kitchen, and every time you walk by or every time you leave your place, read it over quickly, repeat it to yourself. Repetition is the key for memorization, so that's the best way to go about things. But that's really more of the minority of the stuff in medical school. You can understand most of the material you learn in medical school. It's much easier if you learn it to understand it, not just memorize it. So number four, you don't need to know everything. So, maybe this tip won't get you top marks at medical school, but really the goal in medical school is to pass, not to ace everything. In reality, at least at our school, a passing grade was 70%. So you could say, well, I only need to know 70% of the material to pass. Well, that's not true. You actually only need to know about 55 to 60% of the material, and then if you would guess on the remaining multiple choice questions, you had a good chance at getting a few points there and getting a 70% in passing. The goal really isn't to thrive in medical school, it's just to survive and get through. Doing well in medical school doesn't equate to you becoming a good doctor later in your career. There's more to life than medical school, but at the same time, you should spend these years really focusing to build a foundation that you're going to set for the rest of your career. Number five, study partners. So this is a little controversial for me. I tried this a few times and it didn't work for me, but other people and friends that I went to medical school with, they swear by it. For me, my study strategy was pretty good, and I found that studying with other people really just slowed me down, but give it a shot and see if you like it. Number six, continued learning. So this is a really important point. A huge pitfall I saw with a lot of people was that, for example, we would learn anatomy in our first semester, and then we'd have to write our USMLE Step 1 exam after 5 semesters. Some people never looked at anatomy after the first semester, and they ended up having to pretty much teach it to themselves again over the course of a few days in the few weeks prior to writing the Step 1 exam. That is not the way to do it. that is going to give you anxiety and panic attacks and unnecessary stress, and you're just not going to learn the material well. Now, a caveat with this is that a few changes have been made to some of the medical school curriculums, in that instead of being a subject approached curriculum, they're moving towards a systems-based approach. So instead of learning subjects like anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, now you tend to learn things like the cardiovascular system, musculoskeletal system, gastrointestinal system, with all of their related anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology. So this tip may apply, it may not apply. Another change that has happened recently is that, I'm not sure if it's happened or maybe it's something that's going to happen, but I've been hearing that the USMLE exam is possibly going to become a pass-fail exam rather than a percentage exam. And so this is kind of along the lines of an equality of outcome versus an equality of opportunity. And depending on your performance and how you sit, it may benefit you, it may go against you. It's hard to predict. But either way, what I suggest is that when I got time off in between semesters, we'd usually get 2.5 weeks off before the next semester started. During that time, I would spend it reviewing material from the prior semesters. You should always be staying around the same level of performance you were at the end of a semester, or even be a little better off several months afterwards. And you do this by continually improving your knowledge base, continually studying, doing a few questions, continually reviewing. You want to stay on top of your game. You don't want to have to relearn something in a few days before a big exam. Another random tip that might help is that I found that studying things before you go to bed, for some reason this helped me remember things much easier. I remember learning about some actual physiologic or neurologic reason for this during medical school, but I can't remember that reason now, but it definitely works. Number 7, question banks. So question banks and active recall of what you've learned and applying it to different questions, it's fundamental to solidifying the material in your head, and it also makes you better at taking an exam. A big part of the exam is really just being good at taking multiple choice exams. It makes a big difference compared to those who haven't taken many multiple choice exams in the past. You need to actively think about the material in order to better understand it, and when you understand that material and apply it, it's going to help you remember it for a much longer time. I did 2 question banks, and each question bank was something like 2,500 questions. I would flag all the questions that I got wrong or that I got right and wanted to see again because they made an interesting point or maybe talked about something in a way I didn't think about before. I would take notes on the questions I got wrong and also the ones I got right. I would redo questions a few times. I would review my notes from the questions several times. I spent a lot of time on the question banks, and those were a huge part of my success. So number 8, review different resources. It helps to see the same material in different ways, and different resources could mean, your notes, class notes, notes from upper year students, different textbook question sections, different online Q banks, and other high-yield review sources like first aid. For me, the only sources I used were my class lectures. I'd use maybe 1 or maybe 2 textbooks just for the question sections. I use the Kaplan and UWorld Q banks, and I use the first aid textbook. Number 9, you need to take time off and take care of yourself. Some of the things I would do is I would not study past 10 p.m. I'd usually watch about an hour of TV, or maybe it was a movie, or maybe play video games. I'd usually do an hour of that every day. On the weekdays, a little bit more on the weekends. I'd also work out for about an hour almost every day. Other than those things, and then the things you need to do: eat, shower, use the bathroom, get groceries, walking from one place to another, the rest of the time of the day was more or less devoted to studying. So you need to take some time off, but you're still doing a lot of studying, even if you're going to take a few hours or 1 or 2 hours a day to take care of yourself. Using these strategies, I never had to do an all-nighter. Again, I never studied past 10 p.m. I was always relaxed, even before an exam. When everybody else was stressed and pulling all-nighters and everyone was, holed up in the library, I was getting my usual workout in the gym. I was watching my movies, my TV. I'd be playing games. The few days before the exam didn't bother me at all. And ultimately, using these tips, I aced medical school and I scored in the 99th percentile on the Step 1 USMLE exam. If you find something is working for you, then stick with it. Don't worry about what other people are doing, because you're going to see a lot of people talking about different things, and it's very easy to get anxious about that. But if something is working for you, then just tune everything out and just stick with that. Anyone can succeed in medical school. You don't need any kind of special aptitude. It's really just a matter of committing yourself to the goal and putting in the time and the hours to study. I don't think anyone in my class studied more than I did, and that's probably a huge reason why I was able to score at the top of the class.
You have to work, work, work. Everybody up, come on, get up. You two at home, everybody up and say, yes, I can. Say it again, yes, yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
And the last tip, number 10, failure is okay. If medical school doesn't work out for you for whatever reason, that's okay. Life goes on after medical school. You're more than your failures or your accomplishments. Everything is going to be okay. So those are my tips on how to do well in medical school. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, then subscribe to the channel. Thanks.